I'm Ramona, 28 female. I live in a small, quiet apartment that has always been my sanctuary from the world, and especially from my family's constant low-grade chaos. By profession, I'm an accountant, a job that suits my nature perfectly. I find comfort in numbers, in balances, in things that add up and make sense. For years, I was the one who made sure everything in my family's life added up, too. But that was before they accused me of being a thief and tried to ruin my life over money I never touched. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In my family, everyone had a role. My father, Richard, was the patriarch, a man whose love was loud but whose judgment was quick and often flawed. My mother, Susan, was the heart, gentle and trusting to a fault. My older sister, Jessica, was the star, charming, beautiful, and perpetually in some kind of self-inflicted crisis that everyone else was expected to solve. And me, I was the foundation. Ramona, the reliable one. The one who didn't cause trouble. The one who remembered birthdays. The one who quietly stepped in to fix things before they broke completely. My career as an accountant wasn't just a job, it was an extension of my identity. I was good with details, meticulous with records, and I found a deep satisfaction in bringing order to chaos. This skill set made me indispensable at home. When my father's small hardware business had a cash flow problem, I spent a weekend reorganizing his books and found thousands in uncollected invoices. When my mother was overwhelmed by medical bills after a minor surgery, I set up a payment plan with the hospital and managed her budget until she was back on her feet. I never asked for thanks, it was simply what I did. I was the family's structural support, holding everything up from behind the scenes. My relationship with Jessica was complicated. On the surface, we were sisters. We had a shared history of childhood memories, inside jokes, and holiday traditions. But beneath that was a current of unspoken rivalry, almost entirely on her part. She was 2 years older, and while she was blessed with a natural charisma that drew people to her, she lacked any sense of stability. She drifted from job to job, relationship to relationship, always chasing a lifestyle she couldn't afford. She'd call me in tears over a breakup, and I'd be there with ice cream and a listening ear. A month later, she'd be showing off an expensive new handbag while complaining about being broke, a paradox I stopped trying to understand long ago. The real point of friction between us was my mother's savings. My mother had worked for over 30 years as a school administrator, and she was a diligent saver. Her dream was to use that money to travel with my father once he retired. It was her nest egg, her reward for a lifetime of hard work, amounting to a little over $50,000. It sat in a high-yield savings account, a symbol of her patience and prudence. Mom wasn't financially savvy, so years ago, she had added my name to the account. "Just in case, honey," she'd said, "you're the only one I trust to handle this properly if something happens to me." At the time, I was touched by her faith in me. I took the responsibility seriously, monitoring the account, making sure she got the best interest rates, and providing her with monthly updates. I never moved a single cent without her explicit permission. It was her money, her dream. My role was purely custodial. Jessica, however, saw it differently. She made frequent, thinly veiled jokes about the family bank and how nice it must be to have access to that kind of cash. "If I had that, I'd be on a beach in Bali, not staring at spreadsheets," she'd say with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I always brushed it off as just Jessica being Jessica, but a small, uneasy feeling would coil in my stomach. Her envy felt sharp, almost hungry. Things started to shift subtly about 6 months before everything imploded. Jessica began spending more time with our parents, particularly our mother. She'd show up for lunch, take Mom shopping, and offer to help with errands. Everyone saw it as a sign of maturity. "It's so nice to see Jessica finally settling down and appreciating her family," my father would remark with pride. I wanted to believe it, I truly did, but I saw things others missed. I noticed that her visits often coincided with when she needed money for her car payment or rent. I saw how she'd steer conversations with Mom towards finances, asking casual questions about the savings account. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house and found Jessica at the kitchen table with Mom, bank statements spread out between them. "Oh, Ramona," Jessica said, her smile a little too bright. "I was just helping Mom understand her interest yai. LDS, it's all so complicated for her." My mother looked flustered. "Jessica is so good at explaining these things," she said, though she seemed more confused than enlightened. I felt a prickle of annoyance. I was the accountant. I was the one who had managed this for years, but I didn't want to create a scene. "That's great, Jess," I said, forcing a smile. "Just make sure you're looking at the right documents." Looking back, the signs were all there, laid out like a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to disaster. Her sudden, intense interest in Mom's finances, her increasingly expensive tastes that didn't match her income. The way she started positioning herself as the helpful, attentive daughter while subtly painting me as the busy, distant one. She was laying the groundwork, building a narrative. She knew our father's tendency to see things in black and white, and she knew our mother's desire to see the best in her children. She was exploiting their personalities, their trust, and their love. I was the designated pillar of strength in the family, but the problem with being the foundation is that no one ever checks you for cracks. They just assume you'll always be there, holding everything up, until the day the whole house comes crashing down. And I never imagined the person swinging the sledgehammer would be my own sister. The day my world fell apart started like any other Saturday. It was mid-autumn, and the air was crisp with the smell of fallen leaves. My father called me in the morning, his voice unusually tight. "Ramona, I need you and Jessica to come over to the house this afternoon. Your mother and I need to talk to you both about something important." There was no warmth in his tone, just a cold urgency that made my stomach clench. I agreed, my mind racing through a dozen possibilities. Had something happened to one of them? Was it about the business? Nothing could have prepared me for the reality. When I arrived, the atmosphere in the house was thick with a heavy, suffocating silence. Jessica was already there, sitting on the sofa next to our mother. Mom's face was pale, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hands were twisting a handkerchief in her lap. My father stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his expression grim. Jessica looked up at me, and for a fleeting moment I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It looked like triumph. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of manufactured concern. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My father didn't waste any time. "Your mother went to the bank yesterday," he began, his voice low and strained. "She wanted to move some of her savings into a fixed-term deposit. She thought it would be a nice surprise for our anniversary." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But the money wasn't there, Ramona. The account is empty. $50,000 gone." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process what he was saying. "Empty? How could it be empty? I checked the balance just 2 weeks ago." "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "There must be a mistake, a bank error." Jessica scoffed softly from the couch. It was a small, derisive sound, but it sliced through the tension in the room. "Oh, I don't think it was a bank error," she said, her voice laced with false pity. My father's gaze hardened as he turned his full attention to me. "Jessica told us she's been worried about you," he said, his voice growing colder with every word. "She said you've been stressed about money, that you've been working too much. She mentioned you were looking at buying a new car, that you were talking about investments." I was stunned into silence. I had been working extra hours on a major project at work, and I had casually mentioned to Jessica that my 10-year-old car was on its last legs. I'd never spoken of investments. She was twisting my words, weaving a web of lies around me. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, looking from my father to my sister. "What does any of that have to do with Mom's money?" "Don't play dumb with me, Ramona." My father's voice suddenly boomed, and I flinched. I had never heard him speak to me with such venom. "The bank records show a series of large online transfers over the last 3 months, to an account we don't recognize. You are the only other person with access to that account. You and your mother. and she certainly didn't take her own money. Every word was a nail being hammered into a coffin. My own coffin. The accusation hung in the air, monstrous and unbelievable. I looked at my mother, pleading with my eyes for her to intervene, to defend me. She just stared at her hands, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her silence was the cruelest cut of all. She had known me my entire life. She knew my character, my integrity. How could she believe this? How could she sit there and say nothing? Jessica has been helping your mother with her finances lately, my father continued, his voice a relentless hammer. She noticed you were being secretive about the account statements. When she asked you about them, you got defensive. That never happened, I cried, my voice finally breaking. I was never secretive. I gave Mom updates every single month. Jessica is lying. Why would she lie? My father shot back. Why would your own sister lie about something like this? It makes no sense. What does make sense is that you have access, you have a motive, and now the money is gone. His logic was a blunt instrument, devoid of any nuance, any consideration of my history of unwavering loyalty and responsibility. He had already tried and convicted me in his mind. I turned to Jessica, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and despair. Jessica, tell him, I begged. Tell him this is insane. Tell him the truth. She met my gaze, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears. I'm so sorry, Ramona, she whispered, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself there was another explanation. But who else could it be? I just want Mom's money back. It was a masterful performance. The concerned sister, heartbroken by her sibling's betrayal. She had played her part perfectly, and my parents had bought every line. The final, devastating blow came from my father. He took a step towards me, his face a mask of cold fury, his finger stabbing the air. I'm going to give you one chance, and one chance only, he snarled. You have 1 week to return every single cent of that $50,000. If that money is not back in your mother's account by next Saturday, you are no longer a part of this family. You will be dead to us. Do you understand me? The ultimatum was so absolute, so brutal, it stole the air from my lungs. Return the money I hadn't touched. He was asking me to confess to a crime I didn't commit. He was casting me out, severing me from the only family I had ever known, based on the lies of a manipulative thief. I stood there in the center of the living room, the room where I'd taken my first steps and opened Christmas presents, and I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. It was the chilling realization that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, to trust me above all others, had just thrown me to the wolves without a second thought. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it felt like a physical wound. In that moment, something inside me broke. But as the shock receded, it was replaced by something else, something hard and sharp and resolute. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea they had just armed me. I walked out of my parents' house in a daze. The world outside seemed muffled and distant, as if I were underwater. My father's words echoed in my head, "Return the money or you're dead to us." The finality of it was staggering. I got into my car and just sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The initial shock was beginning to curdle into a raw, agonizing pain. It wasn't just about the money or the accusation. It was the ease with which they had discarded me. My entire life, I had been the good daughter, the responsible one. I had built my identity on being trustworthy, and in one afternoon, they had bulldozed it all based on the word of my chronically dishonest sister. The first few days were a blur of grief. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I'd sit in my silent apartment and just stare at the walls, replaying the scene over and over. I called my mother once, hoping that away from my father's influence, she might listen to reason. Her voice was weak, filled with a sorrow that felt directed at the situation, not at me. "Ramona, your father he's just so hurt," she'd said. "Just please, honey, if you just put the money back, we can try to move past this." She still believed I had done it. That was the moment I understood I was completely and utterly alone. My grief was a heavy cloak, but underneath it, a tiny, cold spark of anger began to glow. It was the anger of the unjustly accused. I am an accountant. My entire world revolves around logic, evidence, and proof. An unsubstantiated claim is anathema to me. They had made a claim, a monstrous one, with no evidence beyond Jessica's manufactured concerns. They hadn't asked for my side of the story, they had delivered a verdict. That spark of anger began to burn brighter. It burned away the tears and the despair, leaving behind a cold, clear-eyed resolve. I wasn't going to let them destroy me with a lie. I started thinking, not as a heartbroken daughter, but as an auditor. What was the first rule of any investigation? Follow the money. But before that, I needed to understand the suspect. I started thinking back over the last few months, re-examining Jessica's behavior through this new, horrifying lens. The pieces started clicking into place with sickening clarity. Ty. There was the new designer wardrobe she'd been flaunting. When I'd asked how she could afford it on her part-time receptionist's salary, she'd laughed it off. "Oh, you know me, Ramona. I'm a bargain-hunting genius," she'd chirped. Then there was the sudden weekend trip to a luxury spa resort she'd taken a month ago, posting endless photos on social media. She'd claimed it was a prize she'd won in an online contest. At the time, I'd been happy for her. Now, it felt like she was rubbing my family's stolen money in my face. The most damning memory was a conversation from about 2 months prior. She had called me in a panic, claiming she was behind on her rent and was facing eviction. She had begged me for a loan. Knowing her history, I had offered a small amount enough to tide her over, but I had refused to give her the large sum she was asking for. "You have to learn to be responsible, Jess," I'd told her gently. She had become cold and distant after that call, and our conversations had been strained ever since. Now I realized, that was likely when she had turned her sights from me to our mother's savings account. When I wouldn't be her bank, she found another way. My mind then went to the mechanics of the crime itself. The transfers were made online. My mother barely knew how to check her email. She certainly wasn't capable of setting up a series of complex online bank transfers. That left me, and I now suspected Jessica. But how had she gotten access? I was the only one on the account. Then I remembered that afternoon in the kitchen, finding Jessica with Mom and the bank statements. "I was just helping Mom understand her interest yields," she had said. What had she really been doing? Was it possible she had seen the account number? Perhaps she had seen a password written down somewhere. My mother had a habit of keeping important information in a little notebook in her desk drawer. It was a long shot, but it was a start. The most crucial piece of the puzzle, however, was Jessica's sudden offer to help Mom with her finances. It was the perfect cover. Under the guise of being a helpful daughter, she could have easily gained access to all the information she needed. She could have guided Mom through a password reset or even set up online access herself, claiming it was for Mom's convenience. My mother, in her trusting nature, would never have suspected a thing. A cold certainty settled in my gut. Jessica had planned this. This wasn't a desperate, spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a calculated campaign of deception. She had identified the target, created a cover story, gained access, and then systematically drained the account. And the most brilliant, most cruel part of her plan was framing me. She knew I was the only other person with official access. She knew my parents, especially my father, would see me as the logical suspect. She had used my reputation for responsibility against me, turning my strength into a perceived motive for a sophisticated crime. The weight of her treachery was immense, but it no longer felt paralyzing. It was motivating. My family had cast me as the villain in their story. Fine. If I was going to be the villain, I would be the one who knew all the secrets. I would be the one who held all the cards. The period of mourning was over. It was time to switch from defense to offense. They wanted proof, I would give them proof. I would give them a mountain of it, so high they would choke on it. My path forward was clear. I wasn't just going to prove my innocence. I was going to unmask a thief. And I was going to use the very skills they had always taken for granted, my patience, my precision, and my obsession with the undeniable truth of numbers, to do it. My apartment, which had been a prison of grief, transformed into a command center. The emotional, heartbroken daughter was gone, replaced by Ramona the forensic accountant. My first step was to treat this like a professional case. I opened a new file on my laptop, labeled Project Vindication, and created a detailed plan of action. The objective was simple: gather indisputable, third-party evidence that would trace the theft of the $50,000 directly and exclusively to Jessica. My personal feelings had to be locked away. Rage and a desire for justice were the fuel, but logic and meticulous procedure would be the engine. Shouting and crying had got me nowhere. Cold, hard facts were my only way out. My starting point was the bank. I still had online access to my mother's account as a joint holder, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. Screenshots could be doctored, and my family, in their current state of mind, would likely claim I had manipulated the digital records. I needed official, stamped, undeniable proof. On Monday morning, I took a personal day from work. I walked into the main branch of my mother's bank, the same one she had used for over 30 years. I approached the branch manager, a woman named Ms. Albright W., whom I had met before when helping my mother with her accounts. I explained the situation calmly and professionally, omitting the family drama. I simply stated that a significant sum of money had been transferred out of a joint account without the primary holder's knowledge, and that I was there to request a complete forensic audit of all transactions for the past 6 months. Because I was a legal signatory on the account, the bank was obligated to comply. Ms. Albright was incredibly helpful. She understood the gravity of the situation and immediately set the process in motion. "We will need a few days to compile everything," she told me, her expression serious. "We can provide you with certified copies of all transaction histories, including the IP addresses used for online transfers and the details of the receiving account." The receiving account, that was the key. Jessica wouldn't have been foolish enough to transfer the money directly into her primary checking account, the one my parents knew about. She was careless, but she wasn't stupid. She would have opened a new, secret account. The bank's records would lead me right to it. While the bank began its work, I moved on to the next phase of my investigation, corroborating evidence. I needed to connect the dates of the transfers to Jessica's spending. I became a digital detective, scouring her social media profiles with a new and critical eye. Her posts were a timeline of my mother's stolen money. The first large transfer, for $10,000, had occurred on August 12th. I scrolled back through her feed. On August 14th, she posted a photo of herself behind the wheel of a brand new convertible, a weekend rental. "Treating myself," the caption read. A week later, there were photos of her on a shopping spree, bags from high-end boutiques piled around her feet. Another transfer for $15,000 went out on September 5th. On September 10th, she posted about her amazing, spontaneous trip to that luxury spa. I meticulously cross-referenced everything. I saved screenshots of the posts, the photos, the captions, and the timestamps. I even went a step further, visiting the websites for the car rental company and the spa resort. I found the exact models and packages she had flaunted and calculated the costs. They were astronomical, far beyond what she could ever afford. Her lies about winning a contest or being a bargain hunter were insultingly thin. I created a spreadsheet. In one column, I listed the dates and amounts of the fraudulent transfers. In the adjacent columns, I inserted the dated evidence of her extravagant spending. The pattern was undeniable. Within days of each transfer, a wave of luxury purchases would appear. It was a clear, direct correlation that painted a vivid picture of theft and indulgence. 3 days later, Ms. Albright from the bank called me. "We have the documents ready for you, Ms. Ramona," she said. I went back to the bank and she handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was everything I had asked for and more. There were the official statements, each page stamped and signed by the branch manager. There was a detailed log of all online access to the account, with dates, times, and IP addresses. And there was the smoking gun, the complete details of the receiving account. As I had suspected, Jessica had opened a new account at a different, online-only bank about 4 months ago. The account was in her name and her name alone. The certified statements showed the 5 large transfers from my mother's savings flowing directly into this secret account. From there, the money had been spent with abandon: debit card purchases at designer stores, cash withdrawals at high-end restaurants, payments to travel agencies. But the most damning pieces of evidence were the physical withdrawal slips from the few times she had taken cash out directly from our mother's account before starting the online transfers. Perhaps she was testing the waters. There were 3 slips, each for $500, and at the bottom of each one, in clear, unmistakable handwriting, was her signature, Jessica L. Miller. It wasn't my signature. It wasn't my mother's. It was hers. The bank had provided certified, high-resolution copies. There was no way to deny it. As I sat in my car in the bank's parking lot, holding the thick stack of papers, I didn't feel a surge of triumph or a thirst for revenge. I felt a profound and heavy sadness. This wasn't just data on a page. It was a testament to the depth of my sister's betrayal and my family's blindness. She hadn't just stolen money. She had tried to steal my life, my reputation, my place in my own family. And they had let her. They had held the door open for her. I drove home, the envelope of evidence on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. The investigation was complete. Every claim was supported by a document. Every accusation was backed by a fact. I had a case so airtight that no amount of tears or lies could break it. Now came the hardest part. I had the truth in my hands. The question was when and how to use it. For several days, the envelope of evidence sat on my coffee table. It was a tangible weight in my apartment, a constant reminder of the truth I now possessed. My first instinct was to storm back to my parents' house, throw the papers in their faces, and watch the fallout. The anger in me craved that immediate, explosive release. I wanted to see the shock on my father's face, the panic in Jessica's eyes. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain they had inflicted on me. But I forced myself to pause. I took a deep breath and let the accountant in me take over again. An emotional outburst would give them an opening to dismiss me as hysterical. They would focus on my anger, not on the evidence. Jessica would cry, my father would yell, and the truth would get lost in the chaos. That's what they expected. What they didn't expect was calculation. What they didn't expect was strategy. Rage burns hot and fast, but a well-executed plan can change everything permanently. My family had staged a drama, casting me as the villain. I decided I wouldn't just rewrite the ending. I would direct a whole new final act, on my terms, on my stage. The goal was not just to prove my innocence. It was to make the truth so undeniable, so starkly and publicly visible within the family, that they could never twist the narrative again. I needed a setting where they couldn't run, a moment where they would be forced to confront the facts without distraction. The perfect opportunity presented itself in a text message from my mother. It was a group message sent to me and Jessica. "Family dinner this Sunday. Please come. It's important we are all together." My thumb hovered over the delete button. The thought of sitting at a table with them, of enduring their cold stares and false pleasantries, made my stomach turn. My father's ultimatum deadline had technically passed, but this message suggested he was offering one last chance for me to confess before an audience. They likely planned to use this dinner to formally cast me out, to put a final, ceremonial end to my place in the family. It was perfect. They were setting the stage for my execution, not realizing I was the one who had written the script. A family dinner was the ideal venue. It was a place of tradition, of supposed unity. The contrast between that setting and the ugly truth I was about to reveal would make the impact 100 times more powerful. There would be no escape. With the time and place set, I spent the rest of the week preparing myself mentally. This was the hardest part. I had to endure their silence, their judgment, knowing I held the power to shatter their world. I went to work, I ate my meals, I went through the motions of my life, all while this monumental confrontation loomed ahead. It was a strange, surreal state of existence, like living in the calm before a hurricane that only I knew was coming. I rehearsed the moment in my mind, not the words I would say, but my demeanor. I would not be angry. I would not be tearful. I would be calm, deliberate, and detached. I would present the evidence as if I were delivering a financial report to a board of directors. The facts would speak for themselves, and my composure would be my shield and my weapon. Emotion was their game, evidence was mine. I organized the documents into a logical sequence. I started with the social media posts, evidence of a lifestyle that couldn't be supported. Then, the bank statements from her secret account, showing the influx of cash. Then, the transfer logs from Mom's account, showing the money leaving. And finally, the crown jewels, the high-resolution, certified copies of the withdrawal slips with Jessica's signature, clear as day. I put them all in a simple, professional-looking portfolio. No dramatic flair, just the cold, hard weight of the truth. On Sunday, I got ready for dinner. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, dark-colored blouse and slacks. It was professional, serious. I wanted to look like someone who was there for business, not for a family meal. As I drove to my parents' house, my heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands on the steering wheel were steady. The grief and pain were still there, but they were packed away, sealed behind a wall of resolve. I thought about the potential outcomes. Would they apologize? Would they beg for forgiveness? Part of me, the part that was still the daughter and the sister, hoped for that. But the pragmatic, analytical part of me knew better. People like my sister, and to a lesser extent my father, didn't crumble under the weight of guilt. They deflected, they denied, they tried to find another way out. I had to be prepared for that. I pulled into their driveway and took one last, deep breath. The portfolio of evidence was on the passenger seat next to me. As I picked it up, I knew that when I walked through that door, nothing would ever be the same again. The family I had grown up with was about to be irrevocably broken. But the truth was, it was already broken. I wasn't the one breaking it. I was just the one turning on the lights so everyone could finally see the damage. I got out of the car and walked towards the front door, my steps even and sure. The final act was about to begin. The smell of roast chicken, usually a scent of comfort and nostalgia, filled the air as I stepped into the house. It felt wrong, a domestic charade laid over a foundation of lies. My father was by the fireplace, my mother was setting the table, and Jessica was on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. They all looked up as I entered. My father's expression was a stony mask of disapproval. My mother gave me a weak, pleading smile. And Jessica smirked. It was a tiny, fleeting expression, but I saw it. It was the look of someone who believes they have already won. "Ramona, you came," my father said, his voice flat. It wasn't a welcome. It was an acknowledgement of my arrival for sentencing. "You invited me," I replied, my voice just as level. I placed the portfolio on the small table by the entryway and took off my coat. Dinner was one of the most agonizing experiences of my life. The conversation was stilted and superficial, revolving around the weather, neighborhood gossip, and my father's business. They spoke around me, not to me, as if I were a ghost at the table. Jessica, however, seemed to be enjoying herself immensely. She regaled them with stories about her wonderful new friends and the exciting plans she had for the future. She kept shooting me little glances, her eyes glittering with smug satisfaction. She was an actor playing to an audience of two, confident that I, the villain, had been silenced. I ate my food slowly and deliberately, saying nothing. I let them fill the silence. I let them build their false reality around the dinner table. I let Jessica's confidence swell until it filled the room. This was part of the plan. Let them feel secure, let them believe they were in complete control. When the meal was over and my mother began clearing the plates, my father cleared his throat. "Well, Ramona," he began, adopting the grave tone of a judge. "We're glad you decided to come. It shows that perhaps you've had time to think about your actions. We're here to listen if you have something to say, if you're ready to make things right." This was it, my cue. Jessica leaned forward, her face a perfect portrait of sisterly concern. "We just want to put this behind us, Ramona," she said softly. "We're your family. We can forgive you. You just have to tell the truth and give Mom back her money." I looked from my father's stern face to my sister's deceptive one. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but a profound, icy calm. I stood up from the table. "You're right," I said, my voice clear and steady. "The truth is exactly what we need." I walked to the entryway and picked up the portfolio. When I returned to the dining table, I didn't throw it down. I placed it gently in the center, next to the salt and pepper shakers. Then I opened it. "You've all made some serious accusations against me," I began, my eyes fixed on my father. "You've convicted me without any evidence, so I decided to go and get some." I took out the first set of pages, the screenshots of Jessica's social media. I laid them out, one by one. Here is Jessica on August 14th, renting a sports car that costs $400 a day. Here she is on August 21st, after a shopping spree at stores where a single handbag costs more than her monthly salary. And here she is in September, at a spa resort where a weekend package costs $3,000. Jessica's smile faltered. "I won a contest," she stammered, "and I'm good at finding deals." "Are you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I didn't look at her. I continued to address my father and mother. "Because on August 12th, 2 days before the car rental, $10,000 was transferred out of Mom's savings account. And on September 5th, 5 days before the spa trip, another $15,000 was transferred out." My father squinted at the papers, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. My mother put a hand to her mouth. "Now, let's get to the mechanics of it," I continued, my movements precise and unhurried. I replaced the social media prints with the certified bank statements. Here is a statement from a brand new bank account, opened 4 months ago. The account is in one name only, Jessica Miller. I laid the next statement beside it. And here is the statement from Mom's savings account. Notice the transfer dates and amounts. $10,000 on August 12th from Mom's account to Jessica S. $15,000 on September 5th from Mom's account to Jessica S. And 3 other transfers for a grand total of $50,000. The room had gone completely silent. The only sound was the soft ruse. TLE of paper as I laid out each exhibit. Jessica's face had drained of all color. She was staring at the papers as if they were snakes. The online transfers were made from an IP address that traces back to a public library 2 blocks from Jessica's apartment, I stated, adding the IP log to the growing pile of evidence. "But my favorite part," I said, finally allowing myself to look directly at my sister, "is that before you got clever with online banking, you got a little careless." I saved the best for last. I took out the high-resolution, certified copies of the 3 withdrawal slips. I slid them across the table so they stopped directly in front of my father. "These are withdrawals made in person from Mom's account over the summer, each for $500. The signature at the bottom is required for a teller withdrawal." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Dad, you know my signature. Mom, you know my signature. Take a look. Is that my name signed on those slips?" My father leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up the top slip. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. His brow furrowed in concentration, then his eyes widened in dawning horror. He looked from the paper to Jessica and back to the paper. The color drained from his face. "Richard, what is it?" my mother whispered, her voice shaking. He didn't answer her. He just looked at Jessica, his expression a mixture of disbelief and utter devastation. This is your signature," he said, his voice a choked whisper. Jessica froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The mask was gone. The charming, concerned daughter had vanished, replaced by a cornered, terrified thief. The spotlight she had so eagerly shone on me had just swung around, and its glare was blinding. I looked from my father's shattered expression to my mother's tear-filled eyes to my sister's panicked face. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to shout. I told you so. The silence in the room screamed louder than I ever could. "Your money never left the family, Mom," I said quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. "It just went into a different purse." The silence that followed my final statement was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth out of the room, leaving only the cold, ugly truth sitting in a pile of paper on the dining table. My father continued to stare at the withdrawal slip in his hand as if he was trying to force it to say something different. My mother was openly weeping now, silent tears streaming down her face. And Jessica, for the first time in her life, was utterly speechless. Her bravado, her charm, her entire arsenal of manipulation had been rendered useless. She was exposed, and there was nowhere to hide. My father finally looked up from the papers, but he didn't look at me. He looked at Jessica. The anger he had so readily directed at me was gone, replaced by a look of profound, soul-crushing disappointment. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely audible, broken. Jessica just stared at him, her eyes wide with panic. She tried to speak, to formulate a lie, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The walls had closed in completely. She could only shake her head mutely, which was an answer in itself. In that moment, I expected a storm. I expected shouting, accusations flying back and forth, a dramatic family implosion. But none of that happened. It was worse. It was a quiet, devastating collapse. My father slumped back in his chair, looking like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. The righteous fury that had animated him for weeks had evaporated, leaving behind a frail, bewildered old man who had been betrayed by one daughter and had horribly wronged the other. He turned his eyes to me, and for the first time I saw not just regret but deep, gut-wrenching shame. "Ramona," he started, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I am so sorry." His apology, when it finally came, felt hollow. It was a pebble tossed into a canyon of betrayal. It didn't fix what he had done. It didn't erase the ultimatum, the accusation, the complete and utter lack of faith. Forgiveness wasn't a currency I was willing to deal in. Not anymore. I began to gather my papers, neatly stacking them and placing them back in the portfolio. My movements were calm and methodical. I was an auditor closing a file. The job was done. "Don't," my mother whispered through her tears as she saw me preparing to leave. "Please, Ramona, don't go. We can fix this. We're a family." I stopped and looked at her, at the wreckage around the table. "No, Mom," I said, and my voice was gentle but firm. "We can't fix this. A family is built on trust. This family is bankrupt." I zipped the portfolio closed. I had no intention of leaving the evidence with them. It was my vindication, and I was keeping it. The truth didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. I walked to the door, my coat in hand. As I reached for the handle, Jessica finally found her voice. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to wound me. "You did this to destroy me," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You've always been jealous of me. You wanted to ruin me." I paused, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see her face. I spoke to the door in front of me. "No, Jessica, you did this to yourself." I just held up a mirror. And with that, I opened the door and walked out. I didn't look back. The cool night air felt clean against my skin, washing away the toxic, suffocating atmosphere of that house. As I drove away, I didn't feel anger or even the satisfaction of revenge. I just felt clarity. A quiet, still clarity. I had been defined by my role in that family for my entire life. The responsible one, the stable one, the fixer. They had needed me to be that person so they could be who they were. But their betrayal had been a strange, painful gift. It had severed the ties that had bound me to that role. It had forced me to see that I was not just a foundation for others to stand on. I was my own person. In the weeks that followed, my father and mother tried to reach out. They left voicemails filled with apologies and pleas to talk. I didn't answer. I didn't hate them. I simply didn't have a place for them in my life anymore. The trust was gone, and without it, there was nothing left to rebuild. I heard through a cousin that Jessica had been forced to sell her car and most of her expensive new possessions to start paying my mother back. She had to move into a smaller apartment and take on a second job. My father had insisted on it. Justice, it turned out, was not just about exposure. It was about consequences. I, on the other hand, felt free. The weight of my family's expectations and endless dramas was gone. My quiet apartment was no longer a refuge. It was simply my home. I focused on my work, on my friendships, on building a life that was truly my own, defined by my own values and not by the role someone else had assigned me. They thought they could bury me under their lies, but they underestimated me. They forgot that I'm an accountant. I know how to find the truth, how to balance the books, and how to spot a debt that can never, ever be repaid. Sometimes, the most powerful form of revenge isn't a loud explosion. It's the quiet, final closing of a ledger. My family's account was now closed. Permanently.